Okay, well, I am really happy to be joined by someone who I consider a friend, someone I've worked with, um, Beth. And Beth, do you go by your full name, Beth Adele Long?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And so Beth, by way of introduction, is an engineer by training and a mystic by inclination. I just absolutely love that description. You currently coach software companies in resilience engineering. You write memoir, travelogues, and fantastical fiction. And you're a co-founder of Spiral Press. And we're going to get into each of those pieces. And you live in Portland, Oregon with your dazzling husband and a beautiful patchwork family. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Leo. It's great to be here.
I have a lot to dig in with you. You and I have worked together in different capacities. And so I'd love to dig into all of that. But I think there's some interesting things about you as we talk about this season about creativity and creation and just being a creator. You're someone I wanted to invite on because there's different pieces of that you have either been experiencing and going through, working through, or that you actually teach and coach. And so I wanted to bring in those things. So let's see. I'm trying to see where I feel called to start. Okay, so you're writing actually two books right now.
Yes.
Okay, tell us about those book projects and how that's going.
Sure. So the first book is a memoir that I started in earnest a couple years ago. I had a lifelong goal of being a fiction writer, specifically like science fiction, fantasy, and finally realized that I was really stuck because I had some things that I needed to work out on paper for myself that I kept trying to put into that. And so that led me eventually to writing this memoir. And so with your help last year, I got a draft written, and so I'm in the revision mode with that. And then the second book is called Practical Learning from Incidents, and this is a very, very different book, nonfiction, but not as creative in the conventional sense. And this is oriented towards the software domain and helping people take a new perspective on how they understand their failures and learn from those in really deep and interesting ways.
Amazing. Yeah. So like you said, two very different book projects. One is more like nonfiction and you're doing it as part of the work that you do.
Right.
In your day job. And then you get to come home and like be creative.
Yes.
And what I find, there's a number of things I find fascinating about that. One of them is most people find it daunting to take on one book project. And you're like, that's not enough for me. I need to take on two, like just add to the challenge. So tell me why you decided to take on two at once and what that's been like for you as a process, as a creative process.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is I have a habit of diving in to the deep end first. And sometimes I regret doing that. But more often it opens up interesting opportunities. And in the case of these two books, I was already working on the memoir. I joined this consultancy that I work with now about a year ago when I was already well into the work on the memoir. And one of the things my partner said, business partner said was, we've got this book that we're working on. It was actually one of my dear mentors who passed away a couple years ago. I kind of stepped into his role more or less at the consultancy. And it felt really important to me to carry on Richard's work and see that into the world. And I thought, okay, I'm not the expert in this realm, but I do know how to write and I do know how to get a project moving along. And so I decided to really own working with my business partner, John, and make that book a reality. And there's kind of a complementarity because they're very different projects, but the fear and uncertainty and insecurity and trepidation that you feel every time you sit down to deal with a project are the same, no matter what you're working on. And you can kind of get some interesting perspectives when you're facing those emotions in different contexts, kind of, in the same day.
Amazing. Okay, so you just brought up a really big topic, the fear and uncertainty and trepidation. Love the language around that. So you're noticing that in both places. Is it different in each place? Because one is like a real more like a personal one, but the other one is, carrying on the legacy of a mentor and doing some really important, like trying to make some big changes in the world. So like, does it feel the same sitting down to write each one of those, or is there some differences you're noticing?
That's a great question that I hadn't thought about. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is there is a what right do I have sense with both projects. With the memoir, it's like, who am I, this random person, to just write a memoir? Like, what have I done that anyone would care about? And I don't put that lens when I read someone else's memoir, but of course I put that lens when it's my own. And then with the
So interesting.
Yeah, with the Learning from Incidents book, it's kind of imposter syndrome in the sense of like, do I know enough? Am I educated enough? Am I expert enough? And I
Who am I?
Yeah. That's similar in both.
Okay. I'm fascinated by this, as you could probably tell by now through these questions, but the reason is that it's like an A/B test. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
You're like doing two things at once, and it's like, oh, okay, they're very different, but they're also very the same. And I'm curious if the differences manifest or if it's just like, well, actually, it's the same. Do you spend about the same amount of time writing them? Do you structure your week differently in terms of the writing? Do you need to structure the sessions differently? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, a huge difference is that the second book is collaborative. The professional book is very collaborative, and the first book is just me writing what I want to write.
Right.
Although in both cases, feedback is really important to me. This is something that intellectually in writing, but is very easy to say it's not ready. And one thing I learned doing software for years, I was in the software industry, and you run projects and you realize, get it in front of people as fast as possible and find out what they're saying. So that's similar. And there's some degree of...
Wait, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Can I pause you?
Of course.
Because I want to check in to make sure I understand what you're saying. So, that's baked into the philosophy of software development these days is get feedback, get it in front of people, get that feedback, and build using the feedback. And you're saying that it's important to both of these books as well.
Yeah, both of these.
Like in what way? Like, how does that work?
So with the memoir, I kind of did some writing to figure out what it was that I wanted to say, and then distilled an outline out of that and put the outline in front of a couple friends and got their feedback just on the outline. Okay. And then I went and I wrote a draft. And then before I felt like the draft was anywhere near ready, when I was like, I know I need to fix this. I just, with your help last December, just sent it out to two really good friends and said, will you please read this and just tell me everything that you like, you hate, is confusing, and got their feedback. And that's not necessarily the way, some people write that way, but I think it's very common in creative ventures to be like, I have to just sit at my desk and write a book. And then I'm going to get a developmental editor. But that's after I've gone through 7 years of writing the book. And I'm like, I don't have time for that. I need to get it out in front of people. And if I think something's wrong, that I know I avoid asking for feedback because I don't want to feel the gut punch of either someone saying, this is wrong with your book. And I'm like, I already knew that, I should have fixed it first. Or something I didn't even think of, or something I really liked. They're like, that didn't really work for me. And I'm like, I'm going to put those off as long as possible is my normal way. And so moving that pain as early as possible and accepting that and processing the feedback with the confidence that I can distinguish between someone's opinion that isn't aligned with what I want to do and someone's feedback that actually tells me something I really want to know. I want to get that as early as possible.
Yeah. And by the way, you've mentioned a couple of times, like with my help, just to clarify for people, I'm not actually writing the book with you. We were doing one-on-one coaching at the time. And so, yeah, you were a coaching client. And so I got to have, the great thing about that for me is I got to have a front row seat as I watched you create all of this and work with the feedback. And it's really fun. I get to like cheer you on and just be a part of it. And now you're in my Fearless Mastery program, which is a small group coaching program. Everyone's going through this together as a community. And you're creating within that structure, but you're also training, doing the coach training, which you already do coaching, but this is deepening into that training, like deepening into mastery, which is something I really acknowledge you for. Okay, so feedback. I got some questions on it, but just to kind of look at the other project, how is it working on that side? How are you using it over there?
Yeah, it's actually a little easier on that side because with a technical book like this, there are clear goals that we're trying to achieve with this book, and we have a large community of people who really deeply understand those goals. And so we can go to them and say, we're trying to achieve these goals. Does this book do that? And give them the outline and get their feedback, and then write chapters and then get their feedback. And it is a little bit more analytical and clear cut. It doesn't mean it's easier to do, but it's a little simpler to go through that process. And so it actually looks very similar in terms of, here's the outline, here's the draft, getting feedback really quickly and working as quickly as possible so that you're iterating as many times as possible and not, sitting in a dark corner polishing infinitely.
I love that. Thank you for sharing both of those and how that's working. And just for anyone listening or watching, this is something that I really believe in the power of, and Beth does as well. And I love that you have the software background. You've been in software development or worked in that field for years. And so you really understand the power of it. And so the power of doing that as a creative, as someone creating books or really anything, it's, I think, something that a lot of people maybe don't realize because we're working with the old model of like you said, 7 years, I'm going to write the book and then I'm going to get some editing or some feedback. A lot of people put the book out and then just like, okay, how is that going to land? Is it going to have any impact? But by developing it with feedback, you actually see how it lands a lot earlier before it's ever published. And you get to like, oh, that didn't quite land right. It's not having the impact I was looking for. So I highly recommend that as a process. And I love that that's something that we're in alignment with and you're sharing here. But the reason people don't do it, even though it is this powerful, if they even think of doing it, the reason they won't is because of something you mentioned, which is the pain of getting that feedback. And you said, I want to bring that pain as early as possible. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that because it's a very human thing to like fear getting that feedback. Like, oh God, what are they? I knew that already. I knew that was terrible. Or I thought that was great, like you said. And they didn't think it was so great. So talk about that pain a little bit and how you work with it.
Yeah, I mean, I realize when I'm describing this, like I sort of have my product manager hat on when I say, oh, we need to bring that paint as soon as possible. And, you know, it's easy when you're managing a software project and you're like, come on, everybody, we should just put this in front of users and get feedback. When it's my own stuff, I crumple. I mean, I'm getting better because I've been working on it really intently, but I have had such a hard time asking for feedback. And you can ask even my writers group. I'm in a writers group, and I would go literally a year or longer without sharing something in the group for a number of reasons. But a lot of it was just this, like, if I write something, then I have to get feedback on it, and I don't want to do that.
Right.
And
simple as that.
It's just as simple as that. And yeah, it's been a lot of hard work just to train myself to even recognize how much that resistance is showing up, let alone to be able to work with it effectively.
What makes it so like scary or painful? And you know, as you speak to it, I want to make sure it's clear. It's not just for you. This is pretty much everybody who's creating and putting stuff out there. So I'd love to hear just from your perspective, like what you've noticed about the fear or the pain of that feedback.
Yeah, the more I talk to people, I realize that what I experience is very common, which is kind of going through life with this deep-seated conviction that I'm just so fundamentally flawed and messed up, and that all of the nice things that people are saying are because I'm really good at faking it, or because they feel bad for me and they're being nice. And it's woven so deeply. And then when you get feedback, it's like the inverse. I have a good friend who wrote a piece about the red lenses, which are like the inverse of the rose-colored glasses, where everything gets interpreted as, if it's good, I can't let it in because it just means they haven't seen through the facade. And if it's bad, it's just validating, oh no, there's something wrong with me. And it's this inability to separate myself from the work and to see, it's two things. It's one, it's that, you know, way that we see ourselves and being stuck in that. And then it's also confusing me and my essential being for this thing that I made that came out of me, but is just a thing that I made.
Yeah, we so closely identify, especially when it's a memoir or some really personal project.
Yes.
But even if it's like, you know, a short story, fiction that you wrote, or really anything, an essay, like, this is me putting my heart out into the world, and like any criticism of it is like showing how terrible I am, right? And then now that you've been like recognizing how like tightly woven that is into the fabric of ourselves and the work we're doing, is there any shift that you've been working towards in terms of like how you view it?
Definitely. So for a concrete example, I got feedback on the memoir at the beginning of the year. And I watched myself doing the same things I always do. I had, you know, all of this feedback online, and I was just like cringing. It's like, I don't want to look at it. I don't want to look at it. And I just noticed that and was able to, when I sat down with my friends and got their feedback, I really tried hard to let their praise absorb, like to really take it in and let it really hear, we like what you're doing. This is meaningful. Keep doing it. and then to take the criticisms as, this is a reflection of skill or choice, and to kind of, see it on a screen instead of as if it was written on me. And
That's so good.
and then same thing with the written feedback. It was like, okay, I'm going to pause beforehand and take a deep breath. I'm going to go as slow as I need, but I'm going to say, this is in the service of work that I hope will help at least one person out there who's had a similar story to mine. And like look above that fear to the long-term vision. And then it's like, okay, I can, even if this is mud, I can wade through it because I'm heading towards something meaningful, and this is helping me get there.
I love that. This is helping me get there. A lot of times the feedback, we see it through the lens, like you said, of like, this is a criticism of me, right? This is a reflection of my worth. And yet what you're sharing is a perspective of this feedback, this criticism, whatever it is serving the bigger thing that I want, that I'm trying to accomplish here. This is in service of that, helping me get there. Which then we can be like, okay, give me more helpers, you know, if, in an ideal world. The reality, as you're sharing, is a little messier than that. It's not like we can just like change the lenses of our glasses and see it that way. But that's what you've been working with, and I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next thing I want to look at is going back to the past. We're looking at the present, like your current writing projects, and I have a lot more questions about that, but I don't know how much time we have to answer all my questions. But going back to the past, these aren't your first two books, not your first rodeo.
Right.
Yeah. And so I'd love for you to just share a little bit about your journey as a writer in terms of, what you have created. You don't have to go into a lot of detail. So what have you created? What has shifted in you as a writer from there, the earliest days till now? And then I have another question, but we'll wait for the answers to those.
Sure. Yeah. So I set the goal of being a writer. I think I was 14 or 15.
Okay.
And
so like 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like when you're a teenager, like I wanted to be a foreign service agent or a marine biologist or this or that. Uh-huh. And I settled on writing in part because I did get early successes in a way that indicated, this is something that actually has some real traction. Like I can,
cool.
I believe most people can become good at most things, but there are areas where we have a leg up, we have a talent, and that felt like, I found my thing, so I'm going to follow this. And amazing. I loved science fiction. I love fantasy. I love magic, real and imagined. I love, anything that brings up a sense of wonder. And so I always felt really pulled in that direction. And won an award straight out of college, went to a writing workshop.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
It was
what kind of work was it for?
It was called the Asimov Award at the time, and it's been renamed, and I can't remember what it's been renamed to, but it was
That's a big one.
Well, it's specifically for undergraduate writers.
Okay.
Writing
really
science
cool.
fiction.
Okay.
And the title of the piece that won was Repeating Patterns, which was just foreshadowing of like everything I did in life for the next 20 years. And then I went to a science fiction writing workshop called Clarion that was amazing, and got some short pieces published in small publications here and there. And then my writing just kind of ground to a halt. And there were a lot of reasons for that. Part of it was just I had a lot of growing up to do, and that takes a lot of energy, and that's where my energy went to for quite a while.
How long ago was that it ground to a halt?
I would say it really ground to a halt seriously kind of in my early 30s. I had gone through cancer. I'd gone through a difficult divorce.
Oh, wow.
My dad got sick. There was just like kind of a stack of things that ended up pulling me towards work I really needed to do, and that wasn't writing for a good 10 years or more.
Okay.
And then I started to, I went to Iceland a couple years ago. I went to Iceland for a month, which was amazing, and was writing about my experiences as I was going to, sending like a newsletter to friends. And everyone loved it so much. And I was like, what if this is my thing? What if it's not science fiction and fantasy? Like, what if it's this other mode? And I'd also gotten some of that feedback from my writing group even before that. Like, hey, we love this. This is alive. This has juice. And
Oh, wow.
so that got me to think differently and broaden my possibilities about what I could write. And I had written a novel, a draft of a novel that was, as all first novel drafts should be, truly terrible. But it was grappling with a lot of the themes that I talk about in my memoir. And so all of these things kind of added up to me saying, maybe I'm just going to write a memoir and see if that has traction. And it did. And by traction, I mean that, like, it felt like I was doing something meaningful when I wrote it.
That's awesome. Okay. And I'm curious, after that 10-year break, or about a 10-year break, right? Does it feel... Okay, I got two questions now. So does it feel like stuff was percolating? Like it was like it needed to kind of incubate for a little while before... Like, I'm sure it didn't feel that way in those 10 years, but it felt like maybe there was something developing, and then it finally came out, and it's like, oh, I need to get back to that writing because I've been developing something all this time. Second question is, you talked about wonder and magic that you like were so into. Is that still something that is present as you write?
Yeah. So first question first.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what was percolating was looking back on the writing I did in my 20s. I like it. I don't look at it and think, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. And I see the ways that I was trying to be something, or I didn't know and accept who I was, and so I couldn't write fully from a place of authenticity. And that's still something that I am working towards. It's not like, oh, I have achieved authentic, done. But I feel
Right.
like I'm able to touch into that much more readily and come back to it when I stray from it. And so I think that's what needed to happen before I could come back to the writing.
Oh, so good. So good. Okay, now the wonder question. Wonder and magic.
Yeah, that's absolute, like, more than ever. More than ever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And part of that is it's really, really hilarious because my husband hates anything science fiction fantasy. He says that. It's not 100% true. But a lot of the stuff that
I was like, why did you marry this guy?
I know. A lot of the stuff that just totally lights me up, he's like, I have no time for that. And the things that light me up are things that I think, more than I did even when I was younger, reflect really important realities. So there is magic and wonder in the world, and the world is not what we think it is. Like, none of us actually see the world. as it is. And things that remind me of that get me really excited.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, that if you accept what you just said as true, then anyone who does get excited about wonder and magic is really waking up to like what the world really is.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with you. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And it's so amazing how so many of us dismiss wonder and magic, like this thing that doesn't matter and it's not practical and like it's all just fantastic. Uh, so thank you for sharing that. Next question. If you could go back in time and it could be down, back to your 20s, it could be the 15-year-old you. But if you wanted to, go back and deliver some advice, some wisdom, some tips, something like that, that might help younger Beth on her writing journey as a creator, anything that you'd want to share?
Oh, man. That's always tricky because you can share wisdom, but if someone can't receive it, then it doesn't do any good.
True.
So it's sort of like, but in the spirit of the question, I'll say I would probably go back to my younger self. I think especially like in my late 20s, and say it really is enough just to write what you want. It really is enough just to do something for the joy of doing it and because it's what lights you up. And I'd probably also say, like, and I don't know if I would have been able to hear this, but like I was so caught up in this fantasy of what it would be like when I could just make my living from writing and I don't have to do all this other stuff. And I wish I could say, stop thinking about that. Just, just earn your living, be a good family member and create for the joy of it. Not to get the lifestyle that you think is going to make you happy.
Okay, great. So even if your younger self couldn't receive it, there might be someone listening or watching that can. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that lands with someone. Really good. Okay, I'd like to move on to your day job and not only the book that you're writing, but the coaching you're doing. So I have to say there's a lot that I don't know about it. So I'm going to ask this question from a little bit of ignorance, but you asked me some questions at one point. I think you were using me as a guinea pig. And the sense that I got was that they were about uncertainty and what I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
Okay, tell me more about the work that you're doing there that's being put into the book, but also just the work that you're doing with clients, and specifically about the unknown, what we don't know, uncertainty. I'm really curious about that part.
Yeah. Thank you for asking this, because when I was talking about magic and saying like the world isn't what we think it is, I was saying that more from like kind of how we as humans make sense of the world. But it also really connects to my day job, which is, I work with people in the software industry. They're dealing with these massively complex systems. There's, tons of jargon. And if I even scratch the surface, people's eyes just glaze over. They're like, I do not care about this unless that exact thing is my own day job. And even then, sometimes they don't care about it. But what is relevant to everyone about what I do is that we have a way of making sense of the world, figuring out what to do day to day. And, maybe it's managing a fleet of infrastructure on AWS for a massive website. And maybe it's figuring out how to get your kids to, soccer practice on Saturday while still doing the grocery shopping. But in either case, you have this model of the world. You have a model of, okay, here's who I am. Here's how the world works. Here's the strategies that are going to work for me. And when those models fail, when they don't line up with how things actually work, we experience something that we generally try to push aside as much as possible, which is some kind of failure. So in the software world, it's what we would call an incident or an outage. And for us, it might be, an argument with our spouse. But in either case, there's this breakdown of what we thought should work isn't working. And so what we do with our training and coaching and consulting day to day is training people how to set aside their prescriptive understanding of the world. And funnily enough, it's actually a lot about storytelling. It's like, okay, if something went wrong, go talk to the people who actually dealt with that problem and ask them to tell you the story of what went wrong. And ask them, why did you make this decision? What were you thinking? And always assume that it was in good faith and that they had a good reason for what they did. And when you're done doing that, you're going to have this
not what were you thinking, like my dad used to ask it.
Thank you. Exactly. You're right. Not which is usually the way the question gets asked. Like, what were you thinking? Right. Why did you do this? Obviously, you shouldn't have done that thing. And it's more like, no, really, like it's very much the attitude that I experience when I work with you as a coach or when, we're doing things in Fearless Mastery. It's, okay, so tell me more. So like, why did you push that button? Why did you call that person? Why did you not call that person? And when you talk to a lot of people and get a lot of perspectives about what went wrong in an unfortunate event, you can start to build this collage that gives you very different perspectives from very different parts of the organization. And you start to be able to use failures instead of a sign that you messed up. They're just a sign that you're living in a complex, ambiguous, uncertain world, and that there's no way to fully understand that world. And so you use those failures as like little dowsing rods, like, ooh, there's something interesting over here. And it's basically the same thing we were talking about with feedback. Can you stop seeing feedback as a sign that you are wrong? Can you stop seeing outages as a sign that your organization is flawed? And instead just see it as, oh, this is information and I'm going to use it well to achieve my goals.
I love that so much. And I'm sure we could dive deep into this, but if you come out with that book, I'll promote it so that people can read that book.
Thank you.
But just the idea of using the failures, as you said, dowsing rods, I really love that. Because anyone who's creating anything is not only going to have failures as they're creating it, but afterward. And that's actually a lot of the fear of creating is like, I'm going to put it out there and people aren't going to care about it. They're going to criticize it, or it's not going to become an Amazon bestseller, or whatever our failure fears are. And imagine that could happen and you could use it as a place of discovery. It's like, oh, wow, that's something new to learn, and actually use that as part of the growth. I really love that. So let's let me just get a quick example from you. So let's say I start putting out my writing or my videos or music into the world on a regular basis. Let's say a weekly creation goes out into the world. And I'm thinking, my hope is it's going to go out there and all of a sudden it's going to go viral. I'm going to be like TikTok famous pretty soon. That's my secret hope. Or like, like all of a sudden, a big magazine's knocking on my door to do a cover shoot, something, right? So, but I put it out there and it's getting very little traction. Is there any way that I can take that kind of failure as a dowsing rod? Yeah.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is it's hard when you're just putting things out on social media, or you're just kind of putting it out there and you don't have visibility into how people are engaging with it or why they're not. So here's where I think
that's the end of the story, right? I just put it out there and then nothing. That's the story.
Right. I think you have to have the courage to actively seek people and figure out, learn how to get real useful information from them about, is this something that you want? There's lots of resources out there for different domains how to do this, but it's back to product. Like, you're gonna find your actual users and put the thing in front of them and ask them to use it and watch them use it. And find ways to. Don't ask them hey, do you like my thing that I made? Of course they're going to say yes, because they don't want to. They don't want you to be sad. Not a good question then, right? But if you can actually figure out a way to watch them use it, and one way I love to do this as a writer of the more creative stuff is to go out and do readings, because people will lie to your face after the reading and tell you how great it was, whether they thought it was or not, but they will not lie to you during a reading. And so that is a way to get real-time feedback on, do I have people or not? Are they on their phone or are they locked eyes with me? Right. Are they, you can feel that energy in the room. And that's not a cheap strategy for some people, because public speaking can be very stressful, but there are ways to get that feedback if what you want is to connect with people rather than just to have an outcome.
Right. It reminds me of a stand-up comic going on stage and working out his material, getting live feedback.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
That's so good. I had a friend, Noah, who just did a webinar, and he talked about inviting a reader into his house and watching him read the book that he's been writing. And he was wanting to cringe. He said it was intense. But I love that. He got to actually see someone reading his book. And that's something that I've incorporated as well. I didn't actually invite someone to my house, so that's the next level. But I definitely really believe in watching people either read it or take it and put it into action.
I love that, because if you talk to any writer I know, as soon as you say that sentence, watch someone read what you've written, they're just going to curl up into the fetal position. But this is the power of the work that you do, and why I'm so grateful to you, because you bring people back again and again and again to what possibilities exist if you let go of these fears, conditionings, habits. The world is your oyster if you're just willing to overcome your fear of seeing someone read your book, speaking in public, getting the feedback. Then you can do anything. So valuable. Thank you, Beth, for engaging in this discussion, because I think it's really important. I want to, before we close, I would like to touch on fearless mastery and working with me one-on-one. So why did you come into working with me one-on-one? What are your biggest regrets about that? No, I'm just kidding. What surprised you about that process? Is there anything that you want to share about that process? Tell us about the one-on-one coaching. Yeah, I mean, the reason is really easy. I about a year and a half ago, was sitting at my dining room table, and I was reflecting on how long I had been telling everyone I want to be a writer and quit my job, and how little I had actually done to move in that direction. And I thought, well, I can either get someone to help me figure out if I'm not doing this because I don't actually want it, or if there's another reason, or I can just give up. And that day I got an email from you about one-on-one coaching. And I kind of thought, well, if anyone can help me, I think it's Leo Babauta, and I'm just going to do it. And so I signed up, and one thing that surprised me was how quickly things unlocked, because I had a conversation with you, and like within 2 weeks I had just all this incredible movement in my life, which was partly coincidence, but partly I think also not. But
no, I'll take the credit.
Take the credit. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of what else surprised me. I mean, I think,
or just anything you want to share about the process.
Well, I mean, definitely even though it was the reason that I decided to work with you, the fact that I have a complete draft of a memoir and am barreling through revisions in like month 2 of revising it, that actually did surprise me. Like, I worked with you to do that, but it still surprises me several months later that I was actually able to get to that point. And I think the simplicity of what it was that you helped me to see and do along the way. Like, if I recap it, it's not that complicated. It's just, you helped me do it instead of think about it and talk about it and dream about it.
So good. And then Fearless Mastery, has there been anything about that's been really different for you than the one-on-one coaching? And is there anything you're discovering so far in this round?
Yeah, Fearless Mastery has challenged me a bit, because I am not a group person, in the sense that I can work with teams when there's a common goal, but when it's kind of more social and we're going to support each other, I have a lot of resistance to that. And it has been incredibly rich. It has been really powerful to see my same struggles refracted through these lenses of people who are theater directors and composers and priests and all these different things, but they're all dealing with the same things that I'm dealing with. And so that ability to share the struggle and share the wins and be reminded that it is simple, even though it's not easy, has been incredibly powerful.
Thank you for sharing that. Last thing I want to talk about, because you mentioned, working in a group, and there's a collaborative aspect of that you have actually opened yourself up to, even though, it's challenging and you don't need to do it. You're actually collaborating with a kind of collective publishing mentality and project. So I'd like to hear more about what that is, why you decided to do it, and anything else you want to share about that.
Yeah. So I'm co-founder of this collective called Spiral Press Collective, and it started, I guess, about a year and a half ago, when there's a very popular fantasy author named Brandon Sanderson who had raised a bunch of money and basically started his own publishing company to publish his own books. And I read about this and I thought, we could do this. Like, I'm in this writing group. I've got one friend in particular, Seth, who's in the collective with me, who had written his memoir, which is just gorgeous. And I was like, you're trying to get people to publish this. They're all telling you it's really good, but it's too weird for us. That's my calling card. Like, too weird is like exactly what I want to sign up for. And I just thought, like, why are we waiting around for someone else to give us permission to make this happen? We have tons of skills and resources. We can hire people that don't have the skills we have. Let's just make it happen ourselves. And so that kind of snowballed into this collective. And so a big part of, I mean, the reason that I started this was wanting that freedom to be able to not just write the book, but design the cover, which Seth did, and work with the artist to, lay out the interior and kind of own the messaging and do the book tour and, do all the events around the book, all of which we've been doing. And we look at each other routinely and we're like, do you know what you're doing? Not really. Do you? Nope, I don't either. But we're still doing it. And, I wish I had a copy of the book with me, because it's just, I'll show it to friends and they're all excited about the collective, and then I'll show them the book and they'll be like, that's a real book. Like that looks really good. I'm like, I know. It's like, it's real. So
amazing.
Yeah, that's been really, really fun.
I'm glad that we got to touch on that, because it really opens up possibilities for anyone who's not only writing, but just creating and might feel rejected by like the professional publishing world or something like that. It's really, really tough to be knocking on doors and just keep getting a bunch of no's. And sometimes our work is too weird. Like, it doesn't fit in with the traditional things. And the great thing about these days is that doesn't have to be a limiter. Yeah. But the possibility of banding together and like helping each other to like get our hands dirty with all of that, like really opens up a lot for us. So thanks for sharing and letting us in a bit into that.
Yeah.
That's all the time that we have. I could definitely ask you 1,000 more questions. You have so much richness to share, but I just want to say thank you, Beth, for spending this time with me, for sharing with us, and for really opening up the possibility of developing with feedback and being willing to use failure as dowsing rods. Like, these are huge things. And I want to say, for anyone who is watching or listening to this podcast, I care about that kind of feedback. I want to know how you're using this in the real world. So please write back. podcast@zenhabits.net is the email. It goes straight to my inbox. I answer almost every single one of them, but I definitely read every single one. And if you have anything you want to share with Beth, go ahead and write to that as well, and I'll pass it on to her. But otherwise, I would love to hear like what is coming up for you as you listen to these podcasts. What is resonating, what isn't, what makes you look at your phone instead of paying attention to it, and what's exciting you. So please write to me. Beth, thank you. This has been a huge gift.
Thank you, Leo. This has been a joy.